In the Ahsoka series on episode 3, Ahsoka explains to Sabine how the Force works, but this seems to cause quite a bit of controversy in the fan base.
I can't use the Force. I don't feel it. Not like you do.
The Force resides in all living things, even you.
If that's true, then why doesn't everyone use it?
Talent is a factor, but training and focus are what truly defines someone's success.
So the question is, what was George Lucas's intention with who could use the Force and what it means to be Force sensitive? Now, I had to dig back into my own archive of guidebooks to find the actual quote, but this confirms that Dave Filoni was absolutely correct in explaining this through Ahsoka. We're also going to talk about midichlorians, the Clone Wars, and the expanded universe. In order to find this quote, it's in the book The Making of Return of the Jedi. It's on page 69, where they're in a production meeting in July of 1981, attended by George Lucas, Richard Marquand, screenwriter Lawrence Kasdan, and the producer Howard Kazanjian. They were actually talking about some ideas for the prequels and the story of Anakin Skywalker. So George was talking about the Emperor and how Anakin has started hanging out with him and Anakin being drawn to the dark side. And the details of some of this story and some of his concepts with Yoda, they change later on, but the idea of this Force is right here. So Kasdan asks, the Force was available for anyone who could hook into it? And Lucas responds, yes, everyone can do it. Kasdan says, not just the Jedi. Lucas responds, it's just the Jedi who could take time to do it. And then of course Marquand chimes in, they use it as a technique. So Lucas says, it's like yoga. If you want to take the time to do it, you can do it, but the ones that really want to do it are the ones who are kind of into that thing. And it also shows that later on his original idea for Yoda, which changes by the time he starts to write the prequels, but his idea for who could tap into the Force didn't change. And I'm going to give you guys some proof of this in just a minute when we talk about the very first episode of the Clone Wars series. Now, speaking of the prequels, let's bring into the conversation midichlorians. This is what Ahsoka means when she tells Sabine,
if that's true, then why doesn't everyone use it?
Talent is a factor.
every being is born with midichlorians, microscopic organisms that act like receptors to the Force. Some have a higher midichlorian count than others. So putting these two aspects together, the explanation that yes, everyone has a capability to use the Force to a degree, but your ceiling or your potential in the Force is limited by your midichlorian count. Someone like Anakin Skywalker with a count of over 20,000 is essentially limitless in the Force. But on the other side of the spectrum is someone like Sabine or even Chirrut Imwe from Rogue One. Now, in another character guidebook that I have, right next to good old Chief Chirpa is Chirrut, who's a member of an ancient order of warrior monks called the Guardian of the Wills. They protect a temple of Kyber in the holy city of Jeddah. And of course, we see this in Rogue One. And although he was blind, he could use the Force when he was fighting to sense where his opponents were. He could anticipate their actions and even dodge blaster bolts. Now, he was never powerful or, as Ahsoka says, talented enough to wield the Force to push opponents or to levitate objects, but he was able to enhance his awareness and become a better warrior.
See Jedi?
There are no Jedi here anymore. Only dreamers like this fool.
The Force did protect me.
I protected you.
He could even quiet his mind and could listen to and feel the ebbs and flows of the Force.
Why do you ask that? What do you mean? Does he look like a killer?
The Force moves darkly near a creature that's about to kill.
So this same concept, George brings into the very first episode of the Clone Wars. Remember, George was the executive producer of the first 6 seasons of the Clone Wars before he sold to Disney. Now, in that first episode, Yoda and the clones were in a battle against Asajj Ventress and a battalion of droids when they started to get overwhelmed. Now, the clones are starting to lose hope, but Yoda tells them this.
Clones, you may be, but the Force resides in all life forms. Use it you can to quiet your mind.
So Yoda knows that even the clones, in obviously a very limited capacity, could still use the Force to quiet their minds. Now, even in the expanded universe, Jedi Master Corran Horn had some severe limitations when it came to his Force abilities. He was strong with things like precognition, he was an amazing lightsaber duelist, and he could put up Force barriers in his mind to resist probing, and he could even heal with the Force. But you know what he couldn't do? He couldn't levitate a rock. It took a huge amount of strain to just make a rock wobble. It just wasn't something that he could do. And he actually passed this on to his son and daughter, Valen and Jaisela, I think her name was. Neither one of them could do the same thing. So even the Jedi Order operated with this in mind. Not every single youngling would eventually become a Jedi Knight. If they weren't selected as a Padawan, they would be shipped off to other parts of the Jedi Order. I actually made an entire video on this that I'm going to link to at the end of this video, so make sure to stay tuned. There was even people like Han Solo, who was always alluded to in the books to have a small bit of Force sensitivity, or that Solo luck. Now, let's get back to talking about Ahsoka and Sabine. Now, what's clear to me is that Sabine is on the very, very low end of the spectrum of midichlorian count. In fact, Huyang confirms this in episode 2 and episode 3.
I never had the talent, the abilities. Not like Ezra.
I have known many Padawans over the centuries, and I can safely say your aptitude for the Force would fall short of them all.
That she would never be accepted into the Jedi Order. She doesn't have that talent, so to speak. Now, she's not, in my opinion, ever going to be a Jedi, at least not in the traditional sense. But if she can work hard, if she can listen to what Ahsoka is teaching her, and most importantly, quiet her mind, just like Yoda tells the clones that she can actually still use the Force, even to a very limited capacity. This is why Kanan and Ezra never sensed that she could use the Force. Kanan could tell though that she was being closed off. He even tells Hera this as he's talking to her during their training. Now, Ahsoka knows also that Sabine has a pretty low ceiling, but in episode 3, what she tells Huyang makes perfect sense.
Well, what you said didn't help.
I only spoke the truth. The Jedi Order would not have accepted her. She is not an acceptable candidate.
I don't need Sabine to be a Jedi. I need her to be herself.
See, Sabine's mind is her problem. She's struggling since she lost Ezra during the Battle of Lothal. Now, this is not the same Sabine we saw back then, and I think this is done on purpose. Sabine is a Mandalorian, a warrior, part of a warrior culture, and she can learn to use the Force, but in a very limited capacity. She can become an even better warrior, and maybe, just maybe, she can use the Force to stop Lucasfilm from stabbing people with lightsabers and surviving. Anyway, let me know what you think of this video. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, and click here to see my video on what happens to younglings who don't get chosen as Padawans. Thank you so much for watching, and may the Force be with you.